Good morning, and thank you so much for joining me for Coffee with Carol. This morning we're going to talk about a topic that maybe isn't talked about very often, but it's inspections. When you buy a home or when you're thinking of selling your home, this is something that is going to come up, and it's really an important part of the transaction. But when is it done? Who pays for it? And what's some of the most important things to think about? So let's talk first about the buyer. So if you're buying a home, you are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars on a property that you don't know too much about. So it's really critical, no matter how clean that house looks, that you get a home inspection. Now, can you pay for it? Can you ask the seller to pay for it? Absolutely. Everything is negotiable. It is most common that you, as the buyer, would pay for your inspections. And I'll tell you why. When you hire an inspector, then they're responsible to you. So let's say, for instance, the seller does some pre-inspections that we're going to talk about too. But let's say that they hired someone to do the inspections prior to going on the market. Those inspectors weren't hired by the buyer. If you are the buyer, they have no obligation to you. So it's a little bit tricky. You may want to consider, even if the seller hands you inspections, having your own. But as the seller, let me share with you that it is really smart of you to do pre-inspections. And I'll tell you why. Sometimes you've lived in your home for 15, 20, 25 years, and you have gotten used to the way things are, but perhaps it's not quite the way it should be. Now, you're obligated to disclose everything that you know about the property. So perhaps if you didn't know, then you're not going to be on the hook for it. But I can tell you that your transaction will go much smoother if you have disclosures that you can hand to the buyer in the very beginning and say, here are some inspections. We had these done recently, and this will give you a better picture of our home. Now, you are still obligated to disclose everything you know, because there are times when the seller knows things that happened in the property that obviously the home inspector would have no idea had happened, previous water leaks, that type of thing. But I can tell you that if you do those pre-inspections, it's really smart, and it actually helps us to be able to have a smoother transaction for you. And then in the event that you do them, obviously ahead of time, you'll be responsible to pay for them. But it's small money to pay if, in fact, you can get maybe some projects done ahead of time and eliminate some of the things that will come up on those inspections. A buyer is impressed when a home has very few things that they have to do when they move in: leaky faucet, things like that, electrical issues. So the benefit is not only the full disclosure, but it's also the fact that you get some minor things taken care of before you list the property, and then it's a smoother transaction. Now, let's talk about the different types of inspections. The first is the most common, and that's the whole house inspection. Now, a whole house inspection is done by someone that is typically perhaps a previous contractor. One thing to note is that inspectors are not licensed. There is no such thing as a licensed home inspector because it just doesn't exist in the state of California. But there are things called CREA. CREA is a board that inspectors can take further education, and they actually then are held to a higher standard. So I highly recommend that you look for someone that has those accolades and that has done that additional, training, because quite frankly, you and I could go buy business cards today and print them and be a home inspector. And that's scary. But I will tell you that there are wonderful inspectors out there that they don't have to be licensed. Perhaps they used to be a licensed contractor, so they have a lot of knowledge. But, there are really good inspectors out there that will help you to, find out more about the home. Now, the home inspector is looking for the components of the home. They're checking out your appliances, your electrical, your plumbing, how the home was made. They'll go up in the attic, they'll go underneath the home. They're not looking for things, though, like dry rot. That is a pest inspector. A home inspector can't even use the term dry rot in his report because he's not qualified to call out dry rot. So that's a different inspector. That's a pest inspector. And they're looking for dry rot. That's the most common. They're also looking for moisture damage, and they're looking for bugs and things that you don't want to have in your home or in your attic. But that is a different inspection altogether. So that's somebody that is going to check out mostly the wood in your home. If you're getting a home with a pool, You might want a pool inspection. No might about it. You will want a pool inspection. And if you've never had a pool before, that pool inspector is really helpful to help you understand how to run the pool and the components of the pool. But a pool, as great as it may look, it's a little complicated if you haven't had one before. So definitely want to have the pool checked out. The roof, no matter what type of roof, you may want to have a roof inspection. If you have a tile roof, you want to know to not walk on that roof. So don't just let anybody up to inspect that roof. Be sure you have a licensed roofer that's checking out your roof. How about the chimney? You know, one thing, we have a lot of chimneys in the state of California, and they are wood burning. And what you don't realize is that maybe at some point there was a chimney fire and you can't tell. And maybe that was even 2 homeowners ago. So sometimes people forget to have that chimney inspected, and I highly recommend it. And that way it can be cleaned. And if you want to use the chimney, then it's ready to go. You can also have sewer, septic, well, depending on where you live, will pretty much determine the type of inspections that you have. But I would say don't eliminate any of those things, because you might find out things that would either cause you to not want to move forward, or that you'll want to ask the seller for, some repairs if you're the buyer doing those inspections. Now, if you're the seller and you had inspections done and they found something that you didn't know about, are you obligated to give that inspection report to the buyer? Absolutely. Everything that you have to turn over to the buyer. It's an obligation. So it's just part of your disclosure. Now, some other inspections that come up is, let's say, for instance, you have a home inspector that goes out and they see something that maybe they don't have the knowledge base to be able to, determine. In that case, that may lead to further inspections. Anytime you have further inspections, I highly recommend that you make sure it's a qualified person to do those inspections. So let's say it's something about the structure of the home. Perhaps it's a foundation issue. Make sure it's a structural engineer that goes out to check that out and make sure that it's, appropriately done. Maybe there's mold or asbestos or radon gas or different things that you need to, do some further testing. Those are all important issues. The other thing too is, when you're buying new construction, don't assume that you shouldn't have a home inspection on that as well, because you may find that something was not completed, and that's an important thing to learn. And for a few $100s, you can figure that out. And then obviously, then the contractor, the new home subdivision, they will fix those things, but obviously they can't fix what they didn't know wasn't completed properly. The other thing is boundaries. When you look at a fence, you may assume that the fence is on the property line. Please do not assume that, because that's not always the case. When you buy a home, you will get what's called a preliminary title report. In that title report will be a map of the lot. And if you have questions about the boundaries and where your lot line really truly is, you may need to have it surveyed, because it isn't always the case that the fence is on the property line. Many times that fence has been moved and you may think that that's your property line, and in fact it's not. So that can cause a lot of problems. And then the other thing is permits. When work is done on a home, it is supposed to be done with a county permit, and the county is supposed to come out and check the work as it's proceeding through the process to make sure that it's being done in a skillful manner. If things are done by the seller without permits, there's no guarantee that in fact they were done in a skillful manner. And the other thing is, you're taking on the fact that that home was done without permits. And now that's something you're going to have to disclose, because when you go to sell that home 5 or 10 years from now, and someone goes to the county to get copies of the permits and then learns that there were no permits, that's now your problem. So these are things that you may say to yourself, oh, well, I don't really care. Well, you don't care now, but when the time comes to sell the home, the next buyer may care. So just think about those things as you're buying a home. The last thing is to remember that homes, yes, are sold as is, but subject to inspection. And those inspections should be done right away. So just as soon as you get into contract as a buyer, if the seller has not provided reports, or even if they have, you're going to want to get those inspections scheduled right away. And the reason for that is, maybe there will be things that need further review. Maybe you'll need to call an electrician out to check things out or have a survey done. And you have a limited amount of time to do all of these inspections, whatever you have negotiated in your contract. That's how much you have to get done. That's how much time you have to get not only the inspections done, but any request for repairs has to also be done during that time frame. So be sure you jump on those inspections right away. The contingencies are really important. They're subject to your research. So it is true that maybe the seller didn't know about something that's going on in that home. So again, that's a really important reason to do your inspections. But again, disclosure is mandatory. It's not an option. Sellers, if you know it, you must disclose it. And the last thing is, be sure if you are in fact getting repairs done on a home, if you're requesting repairs, be sure it's done either by a licensed contractor or someone who is a qualified professional to be doing the type of work you're asking for. Never assume, because if you don't put in the appropriate verbiage in that repair addendum, they may do it in a skillful manner, but it may be not done quite up to code or with the, specifications that you're hoping for. So just be very clear. Okay, well, that's it for inspections. Of course, if you have any questions or if I can ever help you, I hope that you will reach out, put a note in the chat. I'm happy to be here for you. Make it a great day.